Sure. I'm Anna Baltzer. I work as national organizer with the U.S. Campaign to End the Israeli Occupation, which is a coalition of hundreds of groups around the country, including some here in Pittsburgh, working to end all forms of U.S. support for Israel's occupation and apartheid regime. And I was really honored to speak at this Friends of Sabeel conference about, specifically about boycott, divestment, and sanctions, as well as our work on intersectionality in Ferguson, Missouri. I mean, first of all, BDS is a great tool to sort of bring the issue of Palestine, for sure, to bring the issue of Palestine to people in the U.S., that we forget that we are so implicated, you know, as the bombs are dropping on Gaza, as hundreds of Palestinian children are killed or held in detention centers, tortured. It's so easy to think of that as something happening on the other side of the world, and boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaigns really brilliantly help us to take something that feels very far away and remember that it is actually a very local issue. It's about, you know, are we purchasing products or hiring contracts and services with companies that are involved in the abuse of Palestinian rights? Are we investing in, profiting from corporations that are heavily involved in, you know, servicing Israeli detention centers or you know, producing the apartheid ID system like Hewlett-Packard and G4S? And so it definitely helps to educate people in the United States and to localize this issue and help us realize our own complicity, and actually gives us the power to take back power and focus on ways of ending our own complicity rather than having to wait around for the powers that be to do the right thing. We're forcing it, we're taking back the reins. In terms, though, of sort of, I definitely think that we're in a moment of transition in the Palestine solidarity movement nationally, of you know, particularly because of the courage of Black leaders around the country in saying what they've been saying for centuries about the crisis we're in this country, about the occupation of Black communities in this country, about mass incarceration and police brutality and white supremacy in the United States. That in the last year there's been an awakening, I think, among many white Americans and others about what is happening in this country, and there have been increasing. They were always there, but even more efforts to place our work for justice in Palestine in a broader context of anti-racism and anti-colonialism and anti-oppression. And sometimes BDS is a tool for that, because we can make connections. You know, the same company of G4S that, you know, operates Israeli prisons is also operating U.S. detention facilities or servicing them. The same company that makes apartheid IDs in Palestine is also, you know, providing technology that helps ICE in its deportations. So we can draw those connections, but we want to look for campaigns that are not limiting us, but actually building power for all our different struggles. And sometimes we can do that, and sometimes we also find other forms of joint struggle, and that's good too. Well, the last year or so has been a humbling one. You know, as somebody traditionally in the Palestine movement, white voices, Jewish voices have been really privileged in ways that are problematic, that eclipse the voices of Palestinians themselves. And likewise, it's been very clear in work in Ferguson that this is about Black people speaking for Black people, and that and the role of white people and the position of white people is very clear and well, it's not always clear, but it's clear what it's not. It's not taking the microphone, it's not doing media interviews usually, it's not being the one calling the shots, and that's, I think, been challenging for a lot of white activists who are used to the kind of affirmation and spotlight that can come along with doing social justice work, to be honest. But it's also been really important. Like I think it's changing us. It's changing the way that we do our Palestine work. To see what's happened in Ferguson is changing the way we do our Palestine work for the better, more to what it looks like to really look to the oppressed themselves as leaders. And I have learned a lot not just from Ferguson leaders, but from Palestinians in St. Louis, and the way that Palestinians have stood in solidarity and centered the call of Black Lives Matter, not trying to make it about Palestinian Lives Matter, which of course they do too, but that right now we're talking about Black Lives Matter and the crisis that we're in this country with oppression of Black communities, and the way that Palestinian communities in St. Louis and particular individuals have centered that message and stood in solidarity, and also begun to build those relationships that where we're seeing the real, we're seeing that incredible cross-issue solidarity that we always talked about, but we never actually built. And honestly, a lot of people like me, which have been trying to keep our mouths shut and listen.